These guys survived the David Kahn era of Timberwolves basketball and live to tell about it. It's Flagrant Howls.
Oh, no, I'm in the wrong room. I'm sorry. I was just trying to complain about the Vikings all day. I must have stumbled into the wrong podcast here, Kyle. My mistake.
I was telling you offline, I was back in North Dakota this weekend visiting an ill grandparent, and I spent the last 5 real minutes of that Vikings game, so the Chargers' last drive and then the Vikings' subsequent game-losing drive at gate F9 at the airport, just surrounded by a litany of other Vikings fans that were just spewing out hot takes one after the other, and it was probably the worst way to spend my Sunday. So,
wow,
we're down pretty bad over here.
Who were at gate F9? Who were people most mad at? Like, who was the top piece of pie on the pie chart of blame at the airport?
Well, they get that stop, obviously, on 4th down or whatever, which was another, as many have deemed it, a fireable offense by Staley. So the Vikings have the ball, and it's like, oh my God, they're going to score. This is actually sweet. And then when they have that completion and the clock starts ticking, a lot of us around were like, okay, they're trying to waste as much time as possible. They don't want to give the ball back. And then all of a sudden that's flipped on like 1 second to like, oh my God, what the hell are they doing? Like they have time for one play and it's first down. So I think between Kirk and KOC, God, just there's a lot of people that are getting blamed in the moment, and it just seemed very hopeless. So
there's something kind of funny about KOC and Kirk Cousins talked about the crowd noise made it hard to hear. The crowd, 70,000 people were yelling spike or clock. So if you would just listen to them, then maybe they could have not panicked and rushed that last play. But anyways, we're here to talk some Timberwolves after a week hiatus here.
Big week, and media day.
You're going to be in town for media day this week. We've got training camp starting. The NBA season is right in front of us here. So if you're already sick of football season and you're looking forward to Timberwolves season, we're going to start you off right here with our guy, Alan Horton, the voice of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Alan, I think this is your debut on Flagrant Howls?
Yeah, I think so. Phil, I've been on with you a couple of times, but I don't think it's on Flagrant Howls. So
no, it's on the Mackey and Judd iteration of SKOR North podcast. But yeah, this is your Flagrant Howls debut. Would you like to complain about the Vikings too, or should we just move past that?
I think you guys have probably said it all, and you can just look at Phil's Twitter feed to see all the. He points them out 1, 2, 3, 4, all the things that went wrong and what should have been done. And I love the ire that you bring out of people and their responses to some of your comments.
I mean, I don't. Sometimes if I have an opinion or I'm angry about something, I will send it out there, and then in retrospect, I'm like, maybe my tone could have been a little bit less angry with that tweet, but. I don't know. People are mean on Twitter too. We were talking about this off microphone. I feel like football fans, maybe because they're just like pent up after 8 months of off season, the responses to a football opinion on the internet are just highly aggressive. And I think we all just need to calm down for a second.
I mean, in the NBA, you've got 70 plus games to go, 60 more of these things. In the NFL, every game matters so much. And I traveled with the Chargers for a long time, producing and engineering their radio broadcast when they were in San Diego. And, even during I think there was a 1-15 season in there with Ryan Leaf at quarterback. Even during that season, you could feel the pressure, the intensity every Sunday. Doesn't matter what your record is. Those things matter. Those games matter. And so when you have a game that slips through your fingers, which didn't happen to the Vikings last year in those 1-score games, and now they've lost all 3 by 1 score or less. It's tough. It's tough to see your team go down. I certainly get that.
So that note on the Chargers is actually a good way to segue into kind of bringing you on the pod. You and I have become friends. I've always said that you're probably if we made a Mount Rushmore of just Minnesota Timberwolves people with the organization, right? Like Alan is on there for sure.
Alan, it's like KG.
Way too kind.
It's KG, Crunch, and Alan.
Jim, Pete, and Alan. Yeah, that's pretty much the 4 of their heads.
It is funny. This will be my 17th year calling Timberwolves games on the radio. And so this is the 35th anniversary season. And I think my son figured it out that next year will be my 18th out of 36 years. I've been around. Next year, I'll be around for half of the franchise's history. So sometimes I think longevity just gets you into that conversation, Yeah, so, nice. I appreciate the crowd noise. That's great.
So the Chargers thing or whatever, you did a podcast with Michael Rand a couple of years ago for the Star Tribune and kind of just talked about how you got here. And the reason I wanted to have you on is not only does this week kick off, I think we're less than 2 weeks away from a game. I think they play their first preseason game a couple weeks in Abu Dhabi, but this is like the start of the season. You're a big part of this, calling all the games. And I just kind of wanted to throw it back to you and just, for the people that don't know your story, whether it be the San Diego angle, working up in Seattle, where you're from, just kind of in classic interview form, like tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
I'll give you the abridged version. I grew up in Western Massachusetts, so I grew up 3 hours away from Boston, but I gravitated to all their sports teams. So Bruins, Celtics, Red Sox, Patriots, which has been fruitful over the years, especially recent history, not so much when I was growing up, except the Celtics. The Celtics really got me into the NBA right when I was hitting my teenage years. That was the 80s, and that was the Celtics Lakers. It was Larry Bird. It was Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Danny Ainge, Dennis Johnson, all these guys. And that really got me going on the NBA. I went to school in upstate New York at Skidmore College, and then did some graduate work at Syracuse, and then moved out to California and spent about 10 years in San Diego, 1 year up in Seattle, working with the Sonics and Storm right during their ownership change and right before their move to Oklahoma City, which was a really interesting time. And then got the opportunity in Minnesota and came here. You know, it didn't quite fall into the category of the KG trade in 07, but a couple of months later, that's when I was acquired. It was a much lesser note in the.
It was Marcus Banks, Al Jefferson, and Alan Horton. Is that? I'm trying to remember the trade.
Theo Ratliff was in there. Gerald Green.
Just
was
his contract, though. Yeah, just it was.
Yeah, and then a month later, it was Alan Horton signed.
You were an expiring contract from Seattle.
I don't even know if I had I don't think I was even under contract in Seattle. So, so I got started late in that 07 season. Fortunately, I think that was the year the Timberwolves, at least in early October, were on the road. They were in Turkey. I think they played a game in Turkey and then in London. And so that gave me a couple of days in the office. And then I was 2 days in the office. We had driven from Seattle, 2 days in the office, and then literally on a flight with Billy McKinney and the team to go do a preseason game. And the next day we were doing a preseason game. We were off and running, and I was playing catch up the entire year, trying to learn. You know, I was familiar with the NBA, but once you start calling games, now you really got to get immersed in it. And so I was just battling to catch up that whole year, relied on Billy an awful lot. My family was still back in Seattle because we had a house there. So we had to kind of figure things out. But that's how we kind of got started. And I've been here ever since.
So I had a note written down that you've called, I think it's like over 1,200 games. But, and again, not blowing smoke because Alan and I have become friends. But one of the reasons I'm such a fan of you is because when I cover games on the road or when I'm back, like I'm sometimes sitting by you and you're calling the game. You're a play-by-play guy. You're an analyst. You're also just kind of a fan in the sense of you're telling stories, you're making people laugh. And what I don't think people realize because there's no video is it's just you. You do have some producers, but like you've got your boards and you've got 5 different layouts and what seems like 10 different screens. There's always people that listen to this that kind of want to get into this industry and stuff. Like, what was it about your time in Seattle, maybe, or maybe just covering, volleyball and baseball? Like, what was it that kind of gave you those reps to be able to be like a 5-tool guy when it comes to play-by-play?
I think the biggest advice I give to young broadcasters who are coming up or who want to get to the professional level is to build that resume. Every experience you can get, you need to take, whether it's a producing role, whether it's an engineering role, whether it's play-by-play of any sport, whether it's radio, whether it's on the internet, whether it's TV. Every rep you can get just builds out that resume and it makes you more valuable. And one of the reasons I was able to jump to Seattle, they needed a Seattle Storm of the WNBA, a play-by-play man or person. And but it wasn't just that. And the guy who hired me is the radio voice of the Utah Jazz, who was in Seattle at the time, David Locke.
David Locke. We found David Locke lived like 2 blocks away 15 years prior. We found out to where I lived when I was in Seattle.
Up in Queen Anne?
Queen Anne, yeah.
Yes, I know exactly that house because I've been up there multiple times. Yeah. So he even told me, had it been just the Storm play-by-play job, there were 100 resumes that they got that they could have gone with. And at that point, it just comes down to, whose voice do you like? And that's a very subjective thing. But they also needed an executive producer of the Sonics radio network, and they were switching stations. They needed someone who knew about ISDN lines and knew how to set up a pregame show and connect a network and organize the studio back in Seattle while David was on the road. To roll on other games. And we had a whole host of, I think, we were one of the few teams, I think, that had a whole team we were rolling on every single NBA game every night. And we had all these interns cutting up highlights and we would splice those in and we would really try to take you, when you were listening to a Sonics game, you're not only were getting all the details about the Sonics, but we're keeping you up to date about everything going on in the NBA. And we were all listening. So if someone went for 30, we'd have a 30-point bell. If we had a great highlight, we'd play it. A buzzer beater, we got it. And so that really then put me into an upper echelon because I could executive produce, because I had done producing, because I had engineered, because I had all this game day experience running my own broadcast sometimes. That really paid off and put me in another level to where it was only, choice of, they narrowed it down to 3 people, and I was fortunate enough to be named. Had it just been the Storm play-by-play, they could have gone a lot of different ways.
Hey, how did, just to fast forward now, I think you became much more of an around the NBA household name with the Ed Malloy botched call, the infamous soundbite. How did that? I mean, that was such an organic, fun moment. How did that change your career, or did it?
I don't think it did at all. It certainly got a lot of notoriety. I think it happened at a time. So we're talking, I think that was 2013, maybe the 13-14 season. It's been such a long time now. It's been almost a decade since that non-call against the Dallas Mavericks, where Sean Marion fouled Kevin Love for a potential game tying 3. And it was sort of in a time, I think right around Christmas. And so it was kind of a dead time, and it got a lot of publicity. There wasn't a lot else going on. And it certainly, I still to this day will get tweets or texts and people will hit me up and say, hey, we got Ed Malloy tonight in Charlotte for Atlanta against the Hornets. I'm just like, okay.
Well, people, and then if he blows a call in any game across the country or whatever, you still see people in all caps tweeting Ed Malloy, with 5 exclamation points.
Yeah. So even almost a decade later, people have not forgotten, and I haven't forgotten either. It was not a fun night because the Wolves got robbed, but and there were a couple other things that happened that season too. Remember, that was the season where the Wolves had lost just a ton of close games to start the season. There were expectations on them. Rick Adelman was the coach. And we'd also have the previous year, we had a couple of plays. One that Ed Malloy was reffing in, where he incorrectly kicked out JJ Barea against the Miami Heat. And then there was another one where Jason Phillips missed a call on, of course, Kobe Bryant gets away with everything, right? Well, Kobe, rest in peace, he fouled Ricky Rubio on a potential half-court shot at the buzzer that the NBA the next day said, hey, we missed the call. And so after this Ed Malloy call, they put out that they missed the call. Ed wasn't looking, he was looking more at the feet and not at the potential contact, and the rest is history.
It is kind of nice that happened at a point where we were online a little bit, but not too much, because if you make that call now, it would have gone so viral that you probably would have had to have done a sit down with Michael Strahan on Good Morning America just to it would have gone so big. So it came at a general organic time where the world wasn't too online. But there was also, you had a really good one. I can't remember if it was a tweet now that you're starting to bring up all your biggest hits, but I remember you kind of lost it in a professional way when the whole untucked jersey thing happened too.
Oh,
that was the one back in Oklahoma City. I remember
Chris
listening
Paul.
back to your call, and you were not happy about that, nor was I. But that was a good one too.
That was, it's funny. I just came across that highlight because I was looking something up, and it came me across the fact that the untucked jersey led to a loss in Oklahoma City in just an unbelievable. I mean, you want to talk Vikings Chargers? This is right up Thunder and Wolves. I don't even know what year this is, but the scenario was Towns had to go to the free throw line. The Wolves were already up 1. I can't even off the top of my head. He had to miss the second one because there was less than a second left. And in between free throws, he did the opposite. He missed the first. He should have tried to make, he was trying to make that, but he missed it. And then he made the second. He should have missed that. So they wouldn't have been able to take the ball out of bounds. But in between those 2 free throws, Jordan Bell checks in. And Jordan Bell checks in with his jersey untucked, just like 98% of players do in the NBA. And he quickly jams it in his shorts. But Chris Paul, this is unbelievable. You can't write this. Chris Paul and, oh my gosh, the official who he always has problems with.
Scott Foster.
Yeah. Yes. Scott Foster turns to Chris Paul. He's like, you're right. Chris Paul was barking, hey, he's got an untucked jersey. That's a technical. Chris Paul knew that we had an earlier delay of game warning because Ryan Saunders went to the bench at the end of the third quarter, and Cat had his knees all wrapped up. He was iced. He was done for the quarter, right? Well, in order to maximize the possession, Ryan wanted to get Towns out there, but Towns wasn't ready. So he goes to the scores table, unwraps his knees, and we get a delay of game warning. Now you're allowed 2. So this wouldn't have mattered had we had Carl not come in the game at the end of the third quarter. So Jordan Bell comes on and they call a second delay of game. But at the time, nobody knows it because we're far away from the floor. I think even TV was confused about exactly what the call was. OKC gets a technical, hits the free throw. So that makes it a 2-point game. So Carl just needs to either make it to make it a 3-point game, but what we were saying was he needed to miss it and they would have to take a length of the court shot to try to tie it or win it. And he hit it. Steven Adams inbounds, baseball pass, Dennis Schroeder lay in, Jeff Teague caught napping, and we go to overtime, and of course the Thunder win.
Oh, God.
Just
unbelievable. Really, actually, that hurts to listen to Alan go play by play there and just bring it back.
But there's like 25 of those moments, I feel like, since you started, 17 years ago, where you could go through that season you were talking about too, where the original Malloy viral clip. If I'm not mistaken, that Wolves team, that the Pythagorean win-loss projection based on your plus minus.
Yes.
They had one of the best plus minuses in the Western Conference. And they were projected to be a 50-win team, and they wound up with 10 fewer wins because of just crazy. Have you, just one last Malloy thing, and I've always wanted to ask you this, and I always forget. Have you ever talked to him since that moment? Have you guys ever had a conversation?
Great question. So Jim Peterson will often join me on a broadcast if there's TV's not covering it and his schedule allows for it. If he's on the road with us, I'll try to bring him in. And so we did that for a Christmas Day game against the LA Clippers years ago. And Ed Malloy's working the game. And so we sit down courtside. We were courtside at that point. And we realize Ed Malloy is one of the officials. And right before we're about to go on, I'm about to toss it to Jim for some keys to the game. He's like, you know what, Alan, I got to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to go ask Ed Malloy. I'm like, Jim, we're 12 seconds away from going on the air. Can we do the keys to the game? He's like, yeah, you got it. You got it. So he gets up and goes to talk to Ed Malloy. And of course, Ed Malloy this is 5 years after the fact. Ed Malloy's like, what are you talking about? He
didn't know?
No, hold on. He was just caught off guard by it.
Okay.
And he was like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? When was this? What year? Who was the team? And so Jim explains it, and I'm doing the pregame show, and I can hear these two talking, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, is he gonna kick us out of the game even before it starts? He might do something crazy like that. He says he remembers the play. He said he did not hear anything about my call, which seems a little hard to believe with the traction that did get, especially over the years. All you have to do is Google your own name, and I think that will probably come up if you're Ed Malloy.
Yeah.
But he gave Jim the line of, I lost sleep for days over that call, which is funny because that exact same phrasing came out this past year when LeBron got fouled in Boston and it was an obvious foul call, and the NBA referees came out and said, we blew it. We lose sleep over these calls. That seems to be a standard line. I lose sleep over it. So anyway, that he remembered the call. He said had not heard it. He remembered the non-foul call, but that was kind of the end of it. And I just don't cross paths with the referees because we're broadcasting usually up from the floor. I see them sometimes in the hallways before the game, but they're not dressed as referees at that point. So sometimes you don't even know, you don't even recognize quickly who those guys are. So we've never talked or we've never crossed paths. I do feel like we had a connection because we're both in the WNBA at the same time too. Yeah. And so a lot of guys come up through that way, but it's as I tell people, hey, it's not up to me whether or not I'm going to go off on the officials tonight. It's up to them. And I think deep down they know that it's part of our job to be critical if the situation warrants it. And I certainly go out of my way to point out how difficult a job they have. And we just got done with broadcaster meetings in which they talk about, Monty McCutcheon talks about all the new rules, points of emphasis, all this stuff. Every single year, they keep heaping more and more responsibilities on these refs. They've now got to keep track of flopping. So not only, Phil, do I have to keep track of whether or not you drew a charge against Kyle driving to the rim, but I got to see whether or not maybe you flopped on the play too, and compute all that in my head and keep an eye if the ball went in, if there was an elbow up in the air, did you get hit in the nose, shot to the head, that type of thing. We keep heaping more and more on these officials. And I don't know how they do it because it's really, we all like to joke about the officiating and everything. It's a terrifically hard job.
So I do want to get your thoughts. Phil and I are using this as our season preview as we get ready for media day and training camp. So I do want to get your thoughts on the upcoming season, but I do want to go back to the timeline because it's so interesting that Kevin Garnett, really the only thing this franchise can hang their hat on, leaves, and then you come in. So you've seen a different 16 and a half years of this franchise organization. Away, like aside from like the big names, like has there been a guy, because you do post-game interviews with these guys and stuff, like has there been a player that stands out that you really enjoyed covering, or just a story you've had during your time here that kind of comes to mind when you think about your time with the organization?
I really do enjoy seeing guys that used to play for the Wolves and guys I had a semi relationship with. I had, Kevin Love's been in the league a long time, and he's been longer with Cleveland than he has been with Minnesota now at this point, which is amazing. Wow. But I had not crossed paths with him until this past season. And then I just went in the locker room and I saw him there sitting, and I said hi to him and gave him a big hug. And, it was just nice to catch up with some of these guys. And I've had that with a couple of different guys. I love seeing Corey Brewer still in the league as a player development coach, I think down in New Orleans. It's great seeing him. I mean, that guy's smile he lifts everybody up. Corey's one of my all-time favorites, especially since he came into his rookie season was my first year in the NBA. And there are a ton of guys throughout the league you just kind of connect with, and especially I think for this 35th anniversary season, we're going to see some of the guys coming back. We always try to put them on the broadcast, whether it's, a guy who I wasn't here for, but Christian Laettner has been on the broadcast a couple of times. I love hanging out with him. We've had a great time on the air. Ryan Gomes, Craig Smith, all these guys that are now doing stuff with the LA Clippers. They have like an alternate broadcast that those two are a big part of. But, right down the line, it's just a lot of guys that I enjoyed being around, and they were always cool to me. There's very few people, players in this league or coaches that, that weren't nice and friendly and, would give you the time when you asked for it.
Yeah, we by the way, some of these names are just like sparking memories from the past, and sparking memories from the 2 times this offseason that Kyle and I have gone through the top 100 Timberwolves of all time. So we had a listener, Alan, submit, this is probably like 2 months ago. We kind of joked about, boy, what are we going to do this offseason for content? So we could rank the top 100 Timberwolves of all time. And the listener submitted their own list of 1 through 100. And so then we said, all right, I'm going to do it myself and present it to Kyle a couple weeks ago. And then there's another tale to this. I'll stop there for a second and just ask you, who do you think, if you just your own opinion, or if you polled sort of the Wolves universe, who do you think should be recognized as the second best Timberwolf of all time?
Behind Miroslav Raduljic.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
See, this is why we bring you on. Right here.
And Alexei Pesharov, Nate Jawai. I love big men. I love big men, and I love our backup point guards, whether it's Kevin
Alexei
Ollie,
Shved.
Alexei Shved. Jason Hart was here for a little bit. We had so many guys come through. And
Ramon
I
Sessions,
in their brains. So wait, what was the question? Second best behind KG?
Who's the second best? Who should be recognized right now today as the second best Timberwolf of all time?
Gosh, I guess my candidates are. Towns. I guess Love has to be in there.
The 1 year of Jimmy Butler, you could put in there. If you're going peak, like Jack Morris is one of the greatest twins of all time.
One plus, Phil. One plus. Remember, he had the beginning of that
next
true.
year
before things went really south.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Boy, 1 year. I can't put him second if I'm.
Oh, I'm with Alan there.
Yeah,
I just can't.
We didn't, by the way, or I didn't, I guess.
Good. Is Anthony Edwards an option?
Oh,
or not?
I guess Ant's quickly going to be in the conversation. Probably doesn't get there, but probably give him a few more years, and I think he's on path to that. I don't know. I just thinking if anybody, not.
Here's my top 10. I'll give you my top 10. I'm always a big fan
of Big Al Jefferson too. Put Big Al in there.
Yep.
Big Al was 11th. Big Al was just outside the top 10, and you might just might
be higher if he didn't blow out his knee in New Orleans that one time when Kevin McHale took over and things were starting to like click a little bit, and Big Al went down. It was. Oof.
He was so lights out in the paint too. Just a great, just that little
another great what if is when, of course, when Ricky Rubio against the Lakers blows out his knee. You just wonder how things might have been different there as well.
We talked about that, Alan, because that was the year. Every year was just all that you focused on was the youth, right, and like the hope of better days. But that was the year that it was like Rubio and Derek Williams. I think they both played in like the the Rising Stars game. So it's like, okay, the Wolves finally have a couple of guys, and I think it's like a month later that Rubio tears his ACL in that spring game against Kobe. So Who was your top 10 though? Because I want to just give Alan just a couple. I mean, he just listed 3 guys that I honestly had forgotten about.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I want to tell him a couple names that were in our
One
top
more
10.
what if when Darko Milicic got hurt on the opening tip once in Portland. That's one of my
you
all-time
never
favorite
know, man.
plays. I've never seen someone get hurt on the opening tip.
What was it?
man-
Was it what did he do? Ankle?
Who knows?
Oblique.
Foot, ankle, knee,
Stretch
just
that oblique.
unwillingness to play. I don't know. Just wanted
There's
to
a
get
story
that game
that,
started.
Apparently, he
track
used
of
to
his game
keep.
started and just wanted to start the game and then be done.
He used to
Little
keep
did he
his
know that would
cash
hurt.
under a mattress. Is how he would. That
Little
was
did
his
he know
bank.
that would hurt his stats so much because you've now played the game, so all your per game stats are screwed up because you only played 22 seconds. Top 10. Boy, I don't know. That's catching me off guard.
I'll give you. What if I give you my 10? You could critique it. Okay. All right. Number 1, Kevin Garnett. Number 2, Karl Anthony Towns. Number 3, and so this is where we get into like, I value what were you at your best, even if it was for a short amount of time over longevity. I have Sam Cassell as the 3rd best Timberwolf of all time.
Yeah.
He was so influential for the best season in franchise history.
Yep.
I think they win the title if he doesn't do the big grapefruit stance and tweak his hip.
Another awful what if.
Kevin Love 3, Jimmy Butler 5. I'm a huge Terrell Brandon fan.
Mm-hmm.
I think they got better actually swapping Stephon Marbury for Terrell Brandon in the late 90s, early 2000s. Tom Gugliotta, one of the most underrated franchise changers. I mean, it was him first, and then KG kind of came along. And then I've got Anthony Edwards 8, Wally Szczerbiak 9, Stephon Marbury 10, Al Jefferson 11.
Yeah, that's pretty
Just on
good.
the outside.
That's really good. I don't know that. I don't know if you start listing 12 through 16, there'll be a guy that I feel like should be in those top 11. I think that's pretty good.
Well, the best part is when you stretch it out to the top 100, we get like Nickeil Alexander-Walker at 82, and I don't think he's played 82 games. So that just tells you how far the list goes.
And he's rising fast.
Did you watch a lot of the FIBA games? Just because we're nerds.
I tried to watch as much as possible. The timing really doesn't work too well. It's kind of like the Women's World Cup soccer. Like it's just, we got to stop hosting these. I know it's not, the world doesn't revolve around the United States. Sometimes we act
but
like
it kind of does. I mean, come on. Yeah.
I need my games at a reasonable time. Okay. We can't stop doing the World Cups at places that start the game at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. But Nickeil, he's been, did anybody even think twice about him being added into that deal with Mike Conley at the trade deadline when they got rid of D'Angelo Russell? He fit in perfectly. I think he has moved himself into being just the 6th man coming off the bench, the way he can defend, the way he can knock down threes. He's been an unbelievable addition, and they signed him up for 2 more years. The way he played for Team Canada, he played a crucial role for them in winning that bronze medal. And he just feels like he's finally getting an opportunity and taking advantage of it. And I think his stock is on the rise.
So this is the best way to segue into a season preview. Going back to the what ifs, I'm a fan, but like, what if the Timberwolves are just good this year? Like, is there a chance, like with a year past the Gobert stuff and kind of putting that behind you, having the ability to have a pick coming up if things don't crater, or if they crater, you know what I mean? It's not all doom and gloom, but what are your just kind of general expectations now that the team seems relatively healthy? We don't have, I was just looking at this the other day. Friday was the 2-year anniversary of the whole Gerson Rosas letting go of him. Like, then last year there was some Ant stuff coming to training camp. Carl's sick. It seems like, knock on wood, that this is the most normal media day training camp we've had in a while. So what are your just kind of general expectations for this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think the biggest question surrounding this team heading into the season is basically the question we had going into last season with the acquisition of Rudy Gobert, and how good can this team be with Karl Anthony Towns and with Rudy Gobert, and what kind of impact can Rudy have when this team's at 100%? I feel like it was an incomplete grade last year with Towns missing 53 games in total with that calf injury. The positive thing is when you look at the numbers with Cat and Rudy together, poor offensively, but great defensively. And the first, before Karl got injured, if you break down the numbers that way, it was a struggle. It was a work in progress. But when Cat came back from the calf injury, the numbers were better. And I think heading into this season, this is now the 3rd iteration, if you will. And I think the expectation is that they'll be better than they were the second time around. And I think it keeps building. And hopefully those guys have worked together enough And I think the coaching staff has a better idea now of how all these pieces fit together. I think Rudy is another year under his belt. I think that was kind of a storyline last year, but maybe got lost a little bit of how much of an adjustment it was for Rudy Gobert to spend the first, 9 years of his career, 8 years of his career in Utah. He is a creature of habit. And so when you uproot him from that, and, even though he put up good numbers, they weren't Rudy numbers, not the numbers you expect from Rudy Gobert when he's the 3-time defensive player of the year. And so I think a year under his belt with these teammates, with his situation, coming to this practice arena, knowing the city, all the things that you kind of take for granted. I think that was, we saw him play better at the end of the year. And I think comfort had a lot to do with that. And I also think the numbers with Mike Conley were fantastic last year. And I think Mike Conley's addition and what he brings to the team, as opposed to your previous point guard in D'Angelo Russell, is going to pay big dividends over the course of 82 games, not just the 24 games that Mike was able to play in.
How do you think on the Anthony Edwards side? I know that the games were all at 2:00 in the morning, but in the games that we all saw, and just hearing what Steve Kerr and Eric Spoelstra had to say, and Anthony Edwards, even just statistically, far and away being the leading scorer on that team. How do you think that World Cup experience helps his career going forward?
Boy, I don't know if you could ask for much more from a young player like Anthony Edwards in his first 3 years, 3+ years. His progress has just been this. If you were to graph it, it's this straight line going upwards. I mean, he's gotten more efficient. He's gotten better offensively, defensively. His shooting numbers, his court awareness, just the savviness is all grown in 3 years, just like you would hope. And then for him to be really the de facto leader of this, maybe not de facto, he was the leader of Team USA. I mean, to have that on that stage and to look the part, it's all positive signs for Ant continuing the progress that he's already shown. He's led this team to the postseason the last 2 years. He's an all-star now. Once you break through on that, it's a really good chance you become a regular. And of course, his play will certainly dictate that. But I just think you couldn't draw up a better first 3 years for Ant and his progression. It's just been fantastic. And he is, what I like most is he backs up what he says. In the playoffs last year, some national reporters were asking him about, being the future of the NBA and one of the great stars. He's like, I haven't done anything yet. I haven't gotten my team has not gotten out of the first round. I don't think I'm one of those young superstars. And that's exactly, that's how Anthony Edwards thinks. He hasn't proven anything. And he's got that mindset that he wants to be great, and he wants to be great at anything he does. I think Austin Rivers said this in a podcast this summer, that Ant he'll play you in anything, even if he's never done it before. He's just like, I'm going to beat you. I will be the best. He's got that mentality. And I think nothing but great things for him. He continues to make strides, and I would expect him to take another jump this season.
Yeah. Hey, Kyle, before we hit Alan with the last couple questions here, we do have to shout out our friends over at Power Lodge here. So Power Lodge and Miller Marine, even though summer is over, fall season on a pontoon, not a bad way to live. You got the changing leaves, some beautiful bodies of water out there. And right now, Power Lodge and Miller Marine are winterizing your boats. Winterization specials right now, free storage with the purchase of a new boat as well. There's Kyle and his family right now on the YouTube channel enjoying some nice throttle therapy out on the water. Get double the value if that new boat is a luxurious Bennington with unbeatable employee pricing stacked on top of rebates. This is the best time of year, actually, to get into a boat, so you can have it for the end of summer into fall and for next year. Find out more at millermarine.com and powerlodge.com. All right, Kyle.
Well, it's either Timberwolves related or about airplanes, so I think we should stick it to Timberwolves for now. What would be your biggest question going into this season? Is it about the Rudy fit still? Is it about, like, one of the things that Alan and I keep thinking about is, like, the Wolves look so good with Kyle at the 4 last year. They obviously keep Nas. Like, they have Nikhil. Like, I said last year the one thing I was right about and everything else I was wrong is that they were going to be the deepest team in franchise history. Well, they're deeper now, in my opinion, than they were last year. Yep. But between, let's say, Kyle Anderson, Nikhil, Nas Reed, I'm forgetting someone else. Like Shake Mill, like one of those guys is going to be like the 9th guy off the bench, right? Yeah. And just with how the pecking order goes. So What is your biggest question mark that you think Finch and Tim and those guys need to kind of address or figure out as we get going for the season?
Yeah, I think speaking to that depth, at the end of the season, they have 9 of their 10 players back from
Yeah.
last season. And the 10th would probably be Jordan McLaughlin, who was on again, off again last year after his calf injury. I expect him to have a bounce back season. He's just too good a player as a backup point guard. And so the one player who's not back is Taurean Prince, and you basically substituted him out for Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. So you actually got a little bit deeper. Now you really have 11 guys right there, and that's not to even mention the rest of the roster who would still have a chance to get some playing time. I think the one question for me, you mentioned Naz Reid and you mentioned Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson was their best option at power forward last season, and so you re-sign Naz Reid. It's interesting. His career high in minutes played is only 19 minutes a game. He only played 18 minutes a game last year, and that's with Cat missing 53 games. So I'm wondering how you work in Rudy. If everybody's healthy, how are you working in Rudy, Cat, Naz? That's 3 for 2 spots. That's normally like enough. You can rotate all 3 of those guys, but you mentioned it, Kyle. Kyle Anderson was their best power forward option. He was the best combination with Rudy Gobert last year. In fact, that was the highest net rating of any of the 2-man lineups was Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert. Kyle, and not only do the numbers back it up, but the eye test, it fits the eye test. Kyle Anderson was incredible last year. The 3 triple doubles gives you an idea of the kind of impact he had last season, but his veteran leadership, his despite the punch at the end of the season, those 2 guys were still the best combination. And he just does so many things. I think he's a winning basketball player. And so now you've got 4 guys for those 2 spots, and I really wonder how that will shake out. Coach Finch joked that he might play Naz at the 3 and try to play Naz, Cat, and Gobert. I don't know if that's going to be true. We'll have to wait and see about that. That would be a little aggressive, but it gives you an idea of how deep this team is. And you've got Jaden McDaniels, who is on the rise as well, who pretty much is slotted into that 3 spot, but he plays some 4 as well. So I'm really intrigued to see when this team is 100% healthy, how the minutes are divvied up and what kind of combinations work best for this team. So it's really a front court question for me.
Jaden McDaniels is just a wild card here in that if he just stays the same as he was last year, just a lockdown perimeter defender who can shoot some threes, can get to the rim once in a while, maybe score 12, 15 points, that's a really good player. But there's another level there, and we've sort of seen it in passing. You saw it, down the street from when we were in Seattle last year, he went and played a couple games. I think it was at Seattle Pacific and dominated.
Oh, the crossover. Jamal Crawford.
The Jamal Crawford tournament.
Yep.
So there's another player in there. And so the wild card for this team is what if he emerges on another level and becomes a 20 points per game scorer, a guy that you can drop plays for. That's something that's kind of lurking, I feel like, in the weeds for this team.
Absolutely. And I think we saw a better Jaden McDaniels when Mike Conley came in too, because again, that took away some shots. D'Lo D'Lo does what D'Lo does, right? And he needs the ball, he needs shots. And when you bring in Mike Conley, who's more of a pass first rather than a shoot first point guard, now that's going to distribute that rock a little bit more. And Jaden McDaniels was one of the beneficiaries of that. And we kind of saw his game. He took a few more offensive opportunities. He took guys off the dribble. And I think they want to see more of that. And it makes you more dynamic the more weapons you have out there at the offensive end. And now I think the Wolves can really play some really locked down defensive lineups. Can you imagine Nikhil on the floor with Jaden, with Rudy, and maybe a Kyle at that power forward spot? You can get some really solid defensive lineups out there. And this Timberwolves defense was a top 10 defense last year. It's only the second time in franchise history they've had a top 10 defense.
Wow.
And a big chunk of that is due to Rudy. Even though he didn't put up Rudy-like numbers, his blocks were down, his rim protection numbers were down from where he's normally at, but he led this team to a top 10 defense, and it's the 7th straight year he's done that. There's no reason to think that number can't even get better this year. Where it's got to get better is at the other end of the floor where they were 23rd in offense, and it really wasn't so much. They were an okay shooting team. Their effective field goal percentage was in the top half of the league. The problem was they were 26th in turnover rate, and they were 26th in offensive rebounding. Yeah. And they've got to figure those 2 things out. You can't continually give up the ball. Turnovers are just, it's like a turnover in football, right? It's just, nothing good can happen from a turnover. You just lost an ability to score, and you've likely given the other team momentum and a really good chance to score. Turnovers are just crucial. And when D'Lo was a part of this team, I looked this up the other day, the turnover rate, the 5 starters, D'Lo, Ant, Cat, Rudy, and Jaden, all were in the top 25 in turnover rate. I mean, the ball was just being turned over left and right. It was better with Mike Conley at the point. Those numbers for all 5 guys went down with Conley subbed out for D'Angelo Russell. So I think that's going to continue too, the more these guys play together. So I think they can get these turnovers taken care of. Offensive rebounding is going to be really interesting because, they don't crash the offensive glass last year, mostly because they were getting burned in defensive transition. Chris Finch wanted to, hey, let more people hang in for that defensive rebound. Or start to get back, not crash the glass. Let's get back to prevent transition buckets from the other team. But one guy who's got to pick that up at the offensive end is Cat. His offensive rebounding has gone down a number of years in a row. Rudy was about where he normally is. I mean, he'll get you 3 offensive rebounds a game. 3 or 4 years ago, Cat was averaging almost 3.5 a game. Obviously a different roster, but now last year he was down at 1.7. And so maybe that's from being on the perimeter too much. Who knows? It's something they've got to figure out because you can't be 26th in the league in that category. If you get to league average in both those categories, this Timberwolves team isn't 23rd. You're likely looking at, maybe around 10th or 10 to 15 range, somewhere in there. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of things that are exciting. And if you can clean up some of the other areas, I go back to the original point, Kyle, that you kind of made, that you kind of just feel like things are okay. We went through last season. Not a lot of things went right. Jaden broke his hand, the punch, Rudy gets suspended. You got Carl injured. It got off to a bad start in training camp. This year, the Timberwolves had just as many players at the World Cup as any other team. They had 5, I think. And all those guys had good experiences. I loved the way Carl played with the Dominican Republic. He seemed to get kind of that joy for the game back where you're just playing. You're not worried about anything else. And I just hope he can kind of harness that, bring that back, and let his play on the court do the talking this year, because he is an exceptional talent on the floor. And if he can just harness that, play with his teammates, work off of Ant, work with Rudy Gobert, I think this has a chance to be really good. And maybe we are talking about a 50-win team.
Yeah, well, you are an exceptional talent off the floor. So we appreciate you being on this pod. I know that,
Kyle, I appreciate that. And I'm going to share something, Phil. So when the news came a couple of weeks ago that the radio broadcasts are going to move off WCCO, Kyle sent me a text, and which I very much appreciate. He's like, hey, I hope everything's okay. I hope this doesn't change the radio situation and you calling games, because if it does, I will riot. And first off, very appreciative of the text. I appreciate the support very much, Kyle.
Yeah, and when are we gonna? When do we find out? When do we find out what's this new venture gonna be?
We're a little bit early on that. I think this will sort itself out here within the next week. But the good news is, what I can say is that Timberwolves fans are going to be able to catch every single game, preseason, regular season, postseason, as they have the last 3 years, because we've only done all preseason the last 3 seasons. So we're off to Abu Dhabi on Sunday. But I appreciate, Kyle, the support. And Phil, I just pictured Kyle running around downtown by himself, trying to riot. I don't know, trying to lift cars up and overturn them, trying to bang on doors. I'm not sure what he's yelling, but man, it made my day. I just pictured Kyle rioting by himself downtown.
He's yelling, Ed Malloy! Ed Malloy!
Typical Friday for me.
I appreciate it, Kyle.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Excited to have you for year 17. Excited to have you. We'll see you around at Media Day. And again, I was talking to some PR people, but announcement should come on what the next step is. But we're really excited to have Alan Horton, voice of the Timberwolves, another year. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for all your hard work, for being a 5-tool player up there. So excited to get this thing rolling.
Amen.
I appreciate it, guys. And thanks for all you guys do. Flagrant Howls all the way.
Alan Horton, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Kyle, we'll see you in the Twin Cities here.
Yes, sir.
To all of you Flagrant Howls faithful, this is your favorite Timberwolves lifestyle podcast. See you next time.